Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Wendy Shaia. I am a clinical professor and executive director of the Center for Restorative Change at the University of Maryland School of Social Work. I am very excited to be here talking to Brother Ron Chisom today. Brother Ron is the co-founder of the People's Institute for Survival and Beyond. The People's Institute has been around for what, 40 years, Brother Ron? Is it 40
Yeah,
years now?
45.
45 years. So Brother Ron has been doing organizing for over 60 years. And so we will, I want to talk a little bit about his work. Stacy went over the SHARP framework, which I developed back in 2017. But I developed that framework using the 10 principles from the People's Institute for Survival and Beyond. And hopefully, Brother Ron, as we talk, we'll sort of weave in and out and discuss some of those principles. But let me tell you a little bit about my mentor and teacher, Brother Ron Chisom. So Brother Ron founded the People's Institute and really helped to create the Undoing Racism workshop. And that workshop has been used around the world with millions of people, and has really seen a big increase in interest, especially since George Floyd was killed. But Brother Ron has been doing this work for decades. Started with tenant organizing in New Orleans. I'm going to ask Brother Ron to talk a little bit about his tenant organizing in just a moment. Brother Ron also sued the Louisiana State Supreme Court in 1984 to create the first seat for a Black justice. There had never been a Black justice on Louisiana State Supreme Court. Brother Ron sued the Supreme Court and created a seat called the Chisom seat, which is still occupied by, was occupied by Judge Burnett Johnson. And that seat is still under, still being challenged to this day, as many Louisiana state lawmakers are objecting to the idea that there is a seat held to ensure that there is Black representation on the Louisiana Supreme Court. So Brother Ron has done amazing work, and so we want to talk more about organizing. Last time we talked, Brother Ron, on part 1, we talked a lot about power. That video is available if anybody would like to see it on YouTube. This is the second part of this discussion, and we're going to talk some more about community organizing. Welcome, Brother Ron.
Thank you, Wendy. Thank you so much. I'm glad, very glad and excited to be sharing and being a part of this collective.
We are excited to have you back with us. So tell us a little bit about yourself. You know, I tried to throw out a little bit of your background, but maybe tell us a little bit more, and in particular, talk to us about the tenant organizing you were doing in public housing in New Orleans, and how that started and what that led to.
Excellent. Well, again, I'm glad to bring you a greeting from New Orleans, and also I bring you a lot of this heat we got here in New Orleans. Extremely hot. I've been in New Orleans all of my life, and I've seen a lot of injustice, and I didn't really understand organizing. I knew something was wrong, so I wanted to help. And I worked at LSU Medical School as a medical research technician for several years, and I worked in the area called neuropathology, and that's when somebody died. The doctor that I worked with was a pathologist, and I worked as an assistant with him. And my job was to, when someone died, is to take the brain from the body and put it in a certain kind of a formaldehyde and prepared it where the doctor could look into his brain and decide, did this person have a stroke or did they have a cancer or whatever. I did that for many years, and I got to learn a lot about the neuroanatomy, even of the brain. But after about several years of that, something, I wanted to do something else. Something wasn't right, because where I was working at LSU Medical School, I worked there where you saw the discrimination, the racism at LSU Medical School. And we seen no Black doctors. I'm not old enough to know there wasn't no Black doctors. So then they had a Black medical student, a young man named Claude Tellis. And me, as somebody always trying to make a change, when I saw this young man came to be a student at LSU, I knew he needed some protection. So I began, me and another young man, to be very close to him and became part of his family and made sure that he could talk with us because we knew he was going to catch hell as a medical student. And we would take him out in the community after he went through his classes and got him to meet folks in the neighborhood. And he got to be one of the top physicians in the country, based in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. He was a thoracic surgeon and got named Dr. Claude Tellett. So, but after doing all of that, I had to leave because of what was going on. And I started doing work in the community and I didn't even know what I was doing. And I started an organization, me and another young man, and called a Trade Community, which is in the area where I've done a lot of my work. Trade is one of the oldest Black neighborhoods in the United States. Some of the great musicians, as the Wynton Marsalis family, Louis Armstrong, Mahalia Jackson, great people have come from this neighborhood. So I started doing work in that neighborhood, just trying to resolve problems. And a lot of residents, tenants, primarily in private housing, not public housing, were being abused because, again, I've been around so long that you still had signs for colored and white tenants that were still going on. And when I saw that, then some residents started knowing that I was in the neighborhood and we had an organization. People would call me and say, look, I have a housing problem and slum landlords, we got rats in the house and all this sort of stuff. So we began to not understand and organizing, but fight these slum landlords because there was no protection for folks in private housing. There was some protection in public housing because of something called a model lease and grievance procedure. You had at least some protection. You had some rent control in a public housing. So I started working with housing all over the city and learned a lot and got to be part of a national group called a National Tenant Organization led by a brother named Jesse Gray out of Harlem in New York. And we began to organize all over the country. And I learned a lot about public housing and I started fighting for tenants' rights and eventually put together a tenant landlord relations commission in New Orleans to try to do something around rent control. Because I think they had rent control going on in Maryland at some point. I know it was in New York. And I learned a lot from these states that were dealing with rent control. And we tried to introduce one in New Orleans and we had to get 10,000 registered voters. And we got them. But we had to go before the city council. And then, but because of the politics, because slum landlords were supporting these predominantly white judges. So even though we had 10,000 registered voters, we couldn't not get it on the ballot to be voted upon. So that's a little bit of my history around housing and did a lot of that. And that's what led me to realize that my community really needed to have some training. Because every time I would organize the residents to fight some of the injustice, environmental racism, slum landlords, we would go down and we would bring people together to do that. And we were effective in some ways because we found laws on a book, something like Article 2694, say a resident had a right to withhold rent to make repairs. We researched that and found it out. But what I realized after all that organizing together, we'd fight the system, then we started fighting each other. And that's the piece I didn't understand. That's when I went and got training by a man named Saul Alinsky. And Saul, Alinsky. Many training groups in this country right now come out of his model of training. So I learned a lot about how to deal with group dynamics and tactical research and group dynamics from Saul Alinsky. But what I realized when I came back from this training, that giving people skills alone is not going to be effective for change. You got to have skills, but you got to understand racism. And what I thought as a Black man, I already knew about it, but I understood racism from being bigotry, from discrimination and hate, but I did not have a systemic analysis. Yet I was always talking about the system. So that's when I realized at that point, along with Dr. Jim Dunn, who was the co-founder, him and I got together in 1980 and started the People's Institute because we were concerned that we're going to be effective in dealing with social work or any work for social change. If you don't understand racism, it'll stop any work you're doing. It'll stop any movement. Because when you check the history, whether it's the women's movement, the populist movement, the labor movement, the civil rights movement, every one of those movements was stopped because of racism. That's when I realized if we're going to be effective in any kind of social change, we must understand racism, the manifestations of it, and we must understand systemic racism because most of us do not have a systemic analysis. We've got a needs analysis, a do-good analysis, a victim analysis. We've got to have them poor folks analysis. That's not enough. We got to have a systemic analysis. And so that's how I got involved. I said a lot, but
all right, there is so much for me to pick up, so many threads for me to pick up here.
Yeah.
I don't even know where to start. So I'm going to ask you to hold for a second because I want to go back over some of the things you've already said.
Okay.
When you talked about doing the tenant organizing, you talked about the fact that you took 10,000 people to city council, or you had to get 10,000 signatures to council. So, you know, that the issue of housing sort of is very salient for us here in Baltimore, because Baltimore has a lot of housing that is not livable. And housing, you know, for those of us who are social workers who are doing this work daily, one of the biggest challenges we run into is housing, right? So people who are in substandard housing, they're being treated badly, they're being kicked out of their housing without due process. We've seen studies that show that most times when renters go to court in Baltimore against their white landlords, that the landlords almost always win. And so when you were doing this organizing, first of all, how did you get to the point where you could talk to 10,000 people, and let alone get 10,000 people to take action? I ask that question because so many of us are trying to do this work, and it is very difficult to get involvement from people, even those people who are most impacted by these discriminatory laws. So how did you get to the point where you were able to organize 10,000 people?
Well, when I first started, a resident would call me and we would listen to him. One person would call me, and this is in private housing, not public yet. Mm-hmm. And it was even more difficult. And yet rats were biting children, and all this was going on was real. And so we would listen. We'd take our time and listen. And then the residents would tell us what was going on, we'd do our research and find out who was the owner of that house. And we would leave out of our office and go find his landlords because he or she would come pick up their rent at some point. And we would go there and challenge them. So, you know, we would do outreach work in the community. Some people want to do outreach long distance because they're afraid to go in the community. So we would be out there in the community. And when the residents would see that, they would tell other people that, you know, they helped me. But what I learned from that is that the universal problem in every social work, every community work is getting people involved, get them to come out. And then when you get them to come out, you gotta know what to do with them. So so we had built a relationship in that community. People saw us doing cleanup campaigns, and there were some people would laugh at us. Eventually, after doing it for months, they came and joined us. This is before the Institute now. This is before we started this training group. So the Undoing Racism workshop people are getting comes out of years of from the community. It's not a module we put together to start doing training. It came out of years of working in communities, predominantly the Black community in New Orleans, and ups and downs and community fighting us, and we didn't know what that was about. That's when we realized that again, that's how we understand what racism is really about. So after we built a relationship, we called community meetings. But we call a community meeting, and maybe 5 people would come out, maybe 10. And then sometime back to 3 again. And what I realized, I used to get mad because we'd have food and door prizes and speakers, and they still wouldn't come out. And what happened was I used to get mad with the community because they wouldn't come to my meeting. But then what I realized later, if I'm going to be the organizer and I can't get them to come to my meeting, I should not blame the victim. I got to blame myself because what it means, I've been ineffective in knowing how to reach the community. But it's hard to criticize myself because I'm the one doing all the work. But if I want to be effective, I gotta see why we doing racism trainings is for people who are doing this work to do a critical examination of themselves. Very difficult to do when you're out here doing social work. You're doing work for other people. You know, you don't see yourself as a problem with because most social work don't see themselves in partnership with the community. They do themselves something for the community, not with the community. So when I began to realize that I had to do better at what I was doing, I developed other plans and strategies, and I've been able to get people to come to my meeting. Because once they came to the meeting, I didn't know what to do with them. See, because what I didn't understand at the time, when they come to the meeting, they would act up in a meeting. But I didn't understand what systemic racism does. See, the three key things about systemic racism or any system. One, it creates a need. That's where social work is coming at. They deal with the need. The second part, it creates an injustice. Most groups don't deal with injustice. They still deal with the need. The third part of the system creates is the pathology. And most groups don't deal with that at all. So what we have to learn over the years, if we're going to be effective and really social, you can't just deal with somebody's need. Because the same people you deal with the need and don't deal with their pathology, those same people that we have worked with will turn on us. Took me a long time to understand all these different dynamics. And I'm still learning how to deal with that right now. So yeah, that's how we begin. Now I know I can call a group. I can bring 50, 100 people out, 1,000 people from a community. Because I have a better understanding what happens when they come to a meeting and after the meeting. Because keep this in mind, community people, because when you have years of oppression, that becomes an addiction. So the people in the community that we all serve also will play game, will kind us and bullshit us. So when we do these trainings, we deal straight with everybody, not only the people that do the services, the people that receive the services. We're gonna be direct and honest with them and call them on their bullshit too.
So, I love this because what I feel like you're talking about sort of this last part here about the pathology that racism creates is this internalized oppression, right? This internalized either inferiority or superiority. If you're a person of color, Black person, other person of color, the narratives in this world create a sense of inferiority, and if you are white, the narratives create a sense of superiority, right? That's what you're talking about.
Yeah.
And it's interesting that you talk about internalized oppression because it's not something that we learn about in social work school, but it is present in every community meeting. It is present in every organizing attempt. But because we don't learn about the pathology that comes with racism and how even for people of color, how we have absorbed that pathology, it's very hard for our organizing efforts to get traction, right? Because we don't have a way of dealing with, when we bring people together to organize the infighting, the posturing, people wanting to be in positions of power. And I agree that that's something that we need to talk about and be prepared for. You talked a little bit about, sorry, there's so much. I want to go back a little bit to the tenant organizing. You talked about discovering a law that really gave tenants a lot of power around landlords that were having them live in very inferior and really inhabitable housing. How did you develop? How did you find out about this article, and what did it mean for your organizing? And what advice do you have for organizers who are trying to do this work? How do they find out about things like this article that allows you to withhold tenants' rents? Can you talk a little bit about how you even discovered that and what that means to your organizing?
Well, first they can research that. It's called Article 2694, which means a resident has the right to withhold rent to make repairs. But when you do that, you got to make sure you keep up with the money, have a bank account and all that, because they'll come back and say you're mismanagement. But it's called Article 2694. But when we started working with the residents, we worked with them for about a year, and then we realized we need some legal help. So we went to New Orleans Legal Services, and we got lawyers. And but the thing with the lawyers, we had to break the lawyers in. Because when lawyers come together, what they would do, they'll say, look, I want to help your residents, but I don't need you all who called me to make any noise because it's going to mess my legal case up. So we thought about that for a minute. We said, wait a minute, no. The reason why we call you because we were making noise. And now you tell us not to make any noise. So we had to explain to the lawyer, this is how we got here. We're going to keep raising hell. So we had to break the lawyers in. And we train lawyers at legal services, and now they're doing international work all over the world, even in places like Haiti. And they were predominantly white lawyers during that time. So that's one thing you got to break the folks who work for you, because what the lawyer was doing, if you're not careful, a lawyer would take your case and will stop your movement. See, we had a movement going on, and we knew better that we couldn't let the lawyer tell us, because once you stop, the lawyer said, wait about 6 months and we're going to work on the case. That's what lawyers do you right now. But we couldn't do that in any kind of movement. So that's how we use the lawyers. That's how we got the law established. And once we got the law established and we understood it, and the lawyers broke it down to us legally, that the residents understood it, that they knew they could withhold the rent. So we were the intermediary as an organization. We made sure we collected the rent, and then we started making repairs. But what happened, the owners of these homes, because they were substandard homes, these houses that they were doing, they were making money two ways. There's a tax write-off, and it was not fixing the houses. It was a slum house. So they're making money both ways. So once we started withholding that rent, they couldn't get it. So they came to our office in the neighborhood in Treme, 3 people in the office. They say, look, we need our money. And then they start saying, well, we'll make repairs. Because when you start holding somebody rent from them, that was their income. That was the money they were misusing the residents on. And so we had that money until some of them began to get the message that they gotta make repairs. Rats were biting children, and they were dealing with lead poisoning. That's when lead poisoning was at its height. It's still at its height, but yeah. I'm telling you, and the kids was eating a chip off and it was getting sick and getting mentally retarded. All this was going on. So so that's kind of how we got the law established, and was able to get the landlords to come to our office. Before they wouldn't even send a letter. They wouldn't even send a letter. When you start dealing with their money, they're gonna come to you. Mm-hmm. So they came to us, and that's how they. But one other piece I want to mention to you is that as social workers and people who work when we do social work, the internalized oppression is playing out within your university. And a lot of folks who work in these jobs, you can't help the community if you don't deal with some of the bullshit inside your own agency. See, and y'all been making waves at that level. I don't know other people on the Zoom where everybody work at, but you can't do social work without doing social to your staff and to the people that's being hurt every day. Because you might have a job as a social worker, but you're everyday citizen. So you got to do both to really understand. But if your mind is only to help the poor people in the neighborhood and all this stuff, and you got a sick system that you work under, you're already toxic. So you're perpetuating the toxicity with the people you're trying to deal with. That's why it's difficult for people to understand what internalized oppression is, because they don't want to accept it because their job's at stake. In essence, you're using the community for the safety of your job, which is really bad.
No, that is so true. And, we as social workers are taught over and over again to go and help the poor people in the poor communities, when in fact, people really can help themselves. Our job is to help facilitate them walking in their power.
Correct.
I think a lot about, so we have a term that we use when we talk about the SHARP framework called socioeducation, which is where, as social workers, when we're working with people, we have a responsibility to share with them social action they can take. right? The sort of helping them to understand the social roots of what they're experiencing, the racist roots of it, and being able to point to see here are these systems that are impacting you. And then the other part of it is for them to take action. But a lot of us are not armed with the right tools. So, for example, being able to say to somebody who is struggling with a landlord, so here are some laws that you may not know about, and here's something that you are legally allowed to do. Very often we don't have those tools in our toolbox because we've been taught to be there to help, to support, to do for, and not necessarily to do with.
That's correct.
So that has been a challenge for us. The other thing you talked about was you talked about being skilled, learning skills versus learning an anti-racist analysis. So that's the other thing that I think is very much a part of our training as human service workers, as social service workers. We're taught to look at people's needs and we go in and the first thing we do is a needs analysis. We do a needs assessment. We go in and we say, what are all the things you don't have? What are all the things you need? What are all the things that you need me to help you with, right? That is the way we're trained to go in, but it changes it sets the dynamics, right? That we are the ones, we are the helpers and that the community members are the recipients. So when you talk about a needs analysis versus a systemic analysis, what do you mean by that?
Well, one is that it'd be interesting to do some research on universities that produce social work, schools of social work. It'd be good to do a study on that to see how many schools of social work teaches what systemic racism is. It'd be good to have that data. It might be write a good book about it because social work students are coming out of social work school with no analysis about race unless somebody picks it up like yourself and begin to work with them. Because we do work at Columbia, at Fordham, NYU, Hunters College, Simmons College, and we've done it for years. And it's a shame that social work, we do it with psychologists too. We work with a lot of psychologists and they say it's a shame. Some of them are upset because they come out of school to be a psychologist and knew nothing about racism. How can you be a psychologist, deal with somebody's thinking and mind and don't understand racism? Racism has messed with our mind for so much and has put white people in a position to automatically think they're in charge, even good white people. So they ought to do some data on that. That's one. When I talk about systemic, I thought we do this all over the world, and we do this in Africa, we do this in Brooklyn, we do this in all communities of color. We've done it in Maryland and schools, and we find that when you ask people what racism is, they can't define it.
Yeah.
And so they can't even define what it is. And that's why the data shows us in the Black community, we're still at the bottom, white folks are still at the top, and other ethnic groups of color go up and down the ladder, depending how they look and all that kind of dynamics. So we do a thing called a power analysis at the Institute. And what I didn't understand, first of all, why it's important to have a systemic analysis, especially in social work, because of the three things that's key for real change: understanding the needs, because people don't understand the needs analysis. When they do a needs analysis, most time they're operating out of blaming the people, thinking they created their own problem. But the system is the one who created the need. So that's number one, why they got to have a systemic analysis for social work, because they don't do a systemic analysis that I know of any sort. And maybe they do it because I haven't been to social work school, but this is my experience working with social workers. So because the reason why I say that, because every needs analysis with every nonprofit organization, they develop a program. And if you develop a program based on somebody's needs, what you're really saying is that there's something wrong with the community and you got to fix them. When really the systems are broken, but we ain't got no program to fix the system. See, just that mentality, you're trying to develop a program to fix people's behavior. But if you got your foot on somebody's neck, you're gonna behave a certain way. That's number one. The second thing is that we got to understand systems, that it creates injustice. Most people operate with a program don't deal with the injustice. The third thing is the pathology. That's why you got to understand the arrangement of a system. Now, what we found over the years that if we're going to be effective, because all the needs assessment is important and the systemic is important. It's not either or. It's not dichotomous thinking, but you got to put them in the right context. But social workers put it more on the needs, not on the system that creates the need. So once I realized that many people do not, I work with brothers in the prisons. They say, yeah, man, I understand the system. I said, why are you locked up in it then, bro? So you might understand in some ways to matriculate, but you do not have a systemic analysis. So we do this work in several prisons. And now many brothers have gotten out of jail because they understand what has put them in jail, because they were doomed to get locked up anyway. I don't care if they did a crime. The crime was on them before they even did a crime. And we help them to understand that. So as an organizer, using the Linsky model, which I've learned so much from, it gives you a lot of skills. And if you give somebody some skills and they don't deal with their racism, they become a skillful racist. Now, you need skills. We're not saying either or. But if you want to be effective, you got to understand racism, because racism has dehumanized us. We don't just talk about racism in a vacuum. It has dehumanized white people and people of color. It has racialized us. So if we only operating on skills, the systems, the institution where you work at, like your university, will use them skills better than you can use them, because that's how they operate. But those universities are not used to dealing with humanity. That's why you got to use your principles, because principles that we talk about will bring humanity along with your skills. What makes you effective in your work, when you start talking about humanity at your university, the system don't like that because they treat you inhuman. So when you start talking about humanity, the system that you're part of become more vulnerable to real change, and then your skills can be more effective. Other for that, it ain't gonna be. The skills will only fortify the oppression, because the skills becomes like nails and hammers. It will only fortify the oppression. You can't use skills alone, not in a system, especially if you don't even understand the system, because it's a structure made up of institutions, made up of all kinds of things. And all you're doing is adding to the community's oppression if you think skills. And white people have been operating out of skills for years and years and years. And then we've learned as people of color to start using those skills, think that that's the answer to it. No, that is not the answer alone. You got to have all of the above.
So you're saying that so you're talking about a needs analysis, which is important. We have to understand that what people need on a day-to-day basis, but that is not the goal. That we really need to understand the root causes of those needs, not
That's
just
symptoms, that's correct.
Right. So when we are going into communities and we are seeing community violence, for example, we know that the root causes of that go all the way back to structural oppression and what has happened in communities and our relationship with systems like criminal justice, and it goes on and on. And the other thing you said that I think is really important for social workers to think about: if there's a foot on my neck, I am going to behave a certain way.
Right. That's right.
Because
and that's going on in the institutions. And all the social workers are dealing, they come from these schools of social work. And the school of social work don't prepare them to really help, even though it's called it a helping profession. The school of social work sets people up to be dependent, which really adds to their death in many ways. That's not, I mean, people that's going in don't mean that they happen, but systems that who give people certificates say now you're certified as a social worker, as a helping profession. Helping along will create dependency. And so you got to get people from being dependent to being independent and ultimately interdependent. That becomes community. The other piece is that when we develop these programs, most programs just program our community. It don't open up their minds. So we have to ask ourselves, how do you know when you give a service? Does it make people aware, or is it a disservice in the name of a service? So how do you know that? You know, I just looked at Sharp when I looked at some of the things y'all are doing. There's two key words in there: engagement and collaboration. And those are two pivotal roles, but they got to be real, 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 and that's usually the challenge. How do we make the engagement real, and how do we make the collaboration? Because foundations over the years have used the word collaboration as a shortcut for not giving individuals money. I want y'all to collaborate. Collaborate. That's their word. So we got to get these words. We got to use these words in a way. So if you take those two words that you got in them and begin to make that happen, then you're gonna see the real, real, real changes. You got the right language, but
Yeah.
we know we're struggling with that, getting people involved. That's a universal problem.
Yeah.
But we haven't done a comprehensive strategy on how to do that. We do a strategy, but it's not comprehensive enough. Because that's a problem that every group got, every system, every nonprofit, every group. It's a universal problem. Unless it's a crisis, somebody get killed or something like that, everybody come around. So the key is that how do we develop a comprehensive strategy to recruit, to bring people in? Because the second piece is that when you recruit, we don't understand the pathology. So some people have recruited people, but then it dissolves because people act up because we haven't studied the internalized oppression, the colorism, the ethnocentrism. You got blacks and Africans that don't work with you, all that kind of dynamics.
So are you suggesting that when we are organizing and we bring people together, that one of the first things we should talk about is internalized racialized oppression? Are you suggesting that when we bring people together, how do we begin to deal with the pathology? Because you're right. And one of the things we see is we see these movements that start off, like, and you could take any of them, Black Lives Matter, most recent, right? You see them take off and everybody's up here, right? Everybody's activated and ready to do the work. And then the professionals come in and we start, looking to the professional organizers, other people, and then the momentum goes and we're back down to the beginning. We can't keep those movements going because we've been taught so much that, there's a professional way to do things. And, and that doesn't do the kind of organizing that you're talking about.
See, the movements are important. We don't want to minimize.
Yeah.
The movement is important. But as an organizer, when you develop that movement, one of our key things is that in that movement, you got to develop leadership. Because you can have a movement, but if you don't develop leadership, that movement only becomes an event. So you got to use those issues of killing of Black people or of slum landlords. Mm-hmm. The organizer got to understand, he or she must understand the issues that they work on as an organizer is to develop your community, develop the people. Most time you're not developing people, you're not opening up the minds, so you can have a discussion about internalized oppression, all this sort of thing. But leadership got to be developed. Organizer one of the roles of an organizer is to use the issue that they're working on to develop the people in the community. Mm-hmm. But most people use the issue uses them. And what happens every time there's an issue, we react to it. And the system knows that. The system will wait a while and say, no, look like they're kind of quiet. Let me give them something.
That's right. So we're on the downward spiral, right?
Let's kill another Black person. And we know they're gonna do it. And I don't want to minimize that, but the organizers, we should respond to that. Don't get me wrong. But we've got to do some preventative things, not just reactionary. We got to prevent some things. And when you develop leadership, the people can fight for themselves. But if we lead them all the time, and they're following all the time, and they're waiting for us to lead them some way. And right now, that has to do with what's going on in this country right now. What I want to mention is that the people on this Zoom are very pivotal position on this Zoom right now because they're dealing with people that's being directly affected by this presidential race, but it's not even so much the person that's running. It's the mass of people that's following this individual, and that's been there for years. Where the mass of white people are following this person because race has a major role with it. Because these folks been waiting for somebody like a president, whether we like it or not. Once you become a president, your credentials come extremely high. I don't give them for your bad president, but once you get that, be a president. So people been waiting for somebody with the same kind of mentality, hating on black people, hating on immigrants, hating on disrespecting women, on and on and on and on and on, and trying to turn this thing back to state rights. The last thing that's got passed was the immunity for a president, but the states can deal with it. Well, we got people running states right now. You're going back to the old enslavement of black people. So I think the folks on this Zoom can play. We're not talking. That's why we say there's an urgency for this. This is not just an exercise. We got to step our community up because if this cat get elected, it's not just him. It's the mass of people that's following him.
Yeah.
Who've been waiting for this opportunity. So anyway, I just wanted to say we have an opportunity to do something about this because everything we've gotten in our community, I know in the black community, has been through organized, in between the legislation. If it's legislation, we have to organize to make that happen. If it's been a policy, we have to know. People think policy right now. You get a policy right now, I don't care if it's a good policy. We don't have the community to back it up. The system will use that policy that was good for us to their advantage. So we got to build that base of community. And the School of Social Work is a pivotal place to make that happen. We just got to step our game up right now.
A couple of things. I want to go back to developing leadership in a moment, but there's something you said that made me think about something. For people who don't know, I am honored to be writing Brother Ron's memoir and organizing manual. And there's something you said when I was interviewing you, one of those interviews a couple of years ago, when we were talking about culture. And you were talking, so one of the People's Institute principles is celebrating culture. And so you were talking about you had talked about the fact that for many white people had to give up their cultures, the Europeans had to give up their cultures in order to become white, right? So people came here and the Italians first soon learned that in order to be white, you got to give up some of that culture, the Irish, the Polish. And so people gave up their culture. Not everybody, some Europeans went back to Europe and said, forget this, I'm not doing that. But a lot of people stayed here and chose to become white. One of the things you said that I have thought a lot about is that Donald Trump provided for white people a culture that, for many white people, not all white people, but for many white people, a culture that they had been waiting for, a set of cultural norms, beliefs, and value systems that tied all these people together under one set of norms. And that for many people is racism. That for many people is internalized superiority. We saw that on January 6th. We see that there's this mass following. We had this conversation a few years ago, but do you still think that? Do you still think that there's this culture, this rise in this white nationalist culture is actually, it's a cultural movement that people are joining. In some ways, people have been anxious to have something to hold on to, many white people, and that's what Trump has provided them.
Yes, period. Yes.
Wow.
You can see it. See, because in order for white people to get their humanity and get their culture, they got to do anti-racist work. See, white people have been racialized. They have been dehumanized because of a concept called white. White is a political term. Black, Hispanic, these are political terms to keep us to keep us segregated. But it has taken white people's, it has dehumanized them. And because when you get privilege, you give up a lot. Because when you get privilege, you get an object. You don't get humanity. So every time they get a privilege, they pay a tremendous price for that. It's a part of, it's a dehumanizing, and dehumanizing is a process. It's a step. It took a while to get there. Now, how they get that back is when they not hang around Black people, but when they do anti-racist work. And sometimes social workers have been put in that category of white social workers to help people of color. But a lot of times people of color, we don't understand they're getting life working with us that they don't get from white culture. And but at the same time they get life from us, they can take life from us if we don't understand the dynamics of it. So for them to get in touch with their reality, white people got to begin to do anti-racist work, which means they're doing humanistic work, but they have to be very careful because they'll use social work as a mechanism to think they're getting life, but they're really getting life, but it's superficial, it's not real. The real life is when they do anti-racist work, when they challenge the power that has set them up. Black people didn't set them up, the dominant white folks set them up. So they got to challenge that strategically. They need to keep their jobs with nobody, trying to get nobody fired, but they've got to do it. They got to save their children. Because right now, as I travel around the country, nobody working with young white kids. Nobody else except the Proud Boys and the paramilitary. You don't see no white programs helping white kids deal with racism. If you got them in Maryland, I'd be nice to see where they at in Maryland, or any other city you got. And we do it all over the country. We ask who's working with white children, who's saving white kids to explain how they've been set up. And nobody can say anything, including, you can save all the Black and brown kids. If you don't save white kids, they're gonna grow up white and still think they're supposed to be in charge. So we got to save all of our children. Yeah. It's a disrespect that they're not working with white kids and letting people like paramilitary and the January 6th people and all that kind of stuff take white kids. They're gonna think that's the right way to go.
That's right.
They're gonna think that's the right, because that's what they see.
That's right. I thought about that a lot, where you have said, that we are putting all of our focus on Black children and other children of color in the effort in what we call anti-racist work. Well, if we were truly doing anti-racist work, we'd be working with white people, right? I think it is a surprise for a lot of white people to really think about how much white people are being dehumanized by racism. I think if white people really were learning that from a very young age, I think we would have a stronger movement, because for every movement we've had against racism, white people have been involved. I think we'd have a much stronger movement if it were clear to most white people how dehumanizing racism is to them, and that if we could join together, then we could really do a lot to eradicate racism. But as you talk about systems that perpetuate themselves, that's exactly what happens in these narratives and in our communication, just even in the press, the stories and the narratives that are told. I want to go back to this idea of leadership. I think very often social workers and those of us who are doing human service work, we think that why we are working with people, why we are working with community members, is to provide them with a service to help them meet their needs today, right? And we know that, of course, people need to eat every day. Those are human rights. They need places to live. But if that's all we're doing, they're going to need all of those things again tomorrow, right? We know that people are going to, that these things are not, we're not solving problems long term. But this idea of building leadership as the ultimate goal of social services and human services, I think, is a very new idea for social workers. What does that look like to build leadership? So to use our services, our service provision, as merely a way, as you talk about the issue, as merely a way to wake people up, to open their eyes, to get them activated and thinking. While they're getting their needs met, those have to happen every day. But how do we get to the point where we are supporting the people with whom we're working in building their leadership, so that at some point they can have control and agency over their communities and they won't need us, right? Good. That's the ultimate goal. But how do we get there?
Well, first of all, you need a human indicator to know that you're doing effective work. most social workers don't have no gauge to know if they're doing effective work. Somebody might come back. Remember, the community that you serve will also bullshit us too that we're doing because they get more services. So they'll con you as well. Or some social workers will get 2 or 3 key people that they really like that becomes a clique. Call that cliquism. That's another dynamic. But you need a human indicator, you know, and that's with any organization, including all black, all brown, or you need 3 or 4 people. Right now we got staff from the community, which is important. But if staff is not grounded, they'll get caught, they'll get co-opted. I'm staff now, you know. But they like when we do a workshop and they got managers and supervisors, in my mind, all I see them as community people. I don't see none of their titles. People get caught in that title dynamic. Remember, even in the black community, we've been influenced by the white dominant culture. We be black running an organization, be operating with a white agenda. That's the mentality. So leadership development, there's a process. See, there was a process to dehumanize us. It didn't happen overnight. There's something called the internal dynamics of leadership development. Internal dynamic, which is going to be, you don't just all of a sudden, boom, you got a leader. I can tell you out of my experience, when I call a meeting now, when I was going to all these meetings, it took me a while. And when I went to all these meetings, I'd bring people with me, but they weren't conscious. But I didn't, because I did all the talking. The hardest job for me in leadership role was to pull back as a leader and help others to develop to where I was at. But many times we don't say it, but some of us like to be in leadership role. We get a lot of accolades, we get a lot of attention, get TV time, all that kind. So when I realized if I'm going to develop leadership, I got to know how to pull back as an organizer, because I was an organizer and a leader. I'm playing both of those roles. And part of my job is to use the issue of housing to develop my community. And when I do that, I can do preventative work, but I also can develop a power base. See, I can't win a victory and don't develop a power base. If I win a victory and don't have a power base, they can take it from me next week. So I got to develop a power base. The next piece about leadership development, you can't develop leadership without accountability. I developed a lot of leaders, Wendy, and some leaders that I developed turned on me. Because I didn't know the other aspect of it. We want politicians to be accountable, but as community workers, we got to be accountable too. And that constituency that we serve will listen to us. But when they start calling us on some of our shit, it'll be a different dynamics. But they're so grateful because we didn't help them food or milk or whatever. So they feel humble. But but leadership is getting beyond that.
Yeah. We need to open it up to questions in just a minute, but there's a story you told me that I'm just going to ask you if you don't mind recounting here again about when you were organizing in the Irish Channel housing development.
Right.
And you were trying to create a coalition and the healthcare program refused to come, and how the community addressed that.
Right. So what it was is that there were 20 different agencies in a certain community. Y'all got that all around Baltimore, I'm sure. All these community groups, church groups that's helping the community. I work with a group of residents in public housing that we had organized, tenants, mostly women, mostly Black women, 99% Black women. And one day they knew we had been working with them, me and a sister named Barbara Mage and a few other people. These residents say, look, they got 20 different groups. All those organizations are making money off of us because when they get their grants, they tell the grant people that we're serving the residents in public housing. All of them use that and have gotten grant. So what the residents told me and Barbara, we want you all to write a letter to all these 20 agencies that use us to get money, but they also give a service to the neighborhood. We think they could be more effective if they would come together as a collective periodically. So we wrote a letter to all these 20 groups, say, we want you all to come to a meeting where we can work more effectively. All the groups came except one, which was the health clinic, which I'm on a board of right now. because they didn't feel they had to come. We give health care. That's the most important thing. We don't need no coming together with no groups. So what we did, we did some research to find out who was funding the health group. So this time we wrote another letter to the health group. Said, once you come to this meeting, and we sent a CC copy to their foundation. They were at the next meeting. And for 7 years, we formed a group called the Irish Channel Consortium. With all these groups, it gave us power. Policemen could not come in there and just misuse our Black community. A politician couldn't come and talk to one group. He had to talk to everybody. And that went on for years. And what came out of that was leadership development. It was called the Irish Channel Consortium. The consortium was a collective. Like y'all use collaborative engagement with a consortium. It's a fancy name. But it worked for many, many years. And that group would give each other report cards. And it was either good, failing, or pass. Wasn't in between. Shit. And one day we got one because we the one that trained the groups. And one day they gave me a F. I said, why? I said, we trained you. Why you did that? He said, well, Brother Chisom, you told us that people coming out of the community and they leave. Where every week you were going out of town doing work in another city. You kept leaving. So you're not here with us either. That's when I realized if I want to be effective, it can't be dependent on Ron Chisom. I got to develop new leadership. So when I'm gone, other folks would take care of business. There was too much dependency on me.
Mm-hmm. And they held you accountable, right? Along with that leadership came accountability. And I love this idea of holding local service providers and nonprofits accountable, the community holding people accountable. I just keep thinking how differently our services would look if community members got to send our funders scorecards on us and how we showed up in the community and how we treat people and whether or not we are respectful and engaged and committed. I think our services would look very different, don't you think? All right. I think I froze for a second there, but I think I'm back. I want to open it up for questions to see what people might want to ask Brother Ron. So please feel free. Yeah, Stacey, thank you. Please feel free to come on camera, come off mute, and ask any questions you may have for Brother Ron.
I have a question.
Go for it, Gail.
So I'm at a place where I'm thinking about what this leadership development ought to look like. And so that to get a little bit in the weeds, Brother Ron, when we talk about, so you've got a group of people and they're milling around and they're ready to do something, and you realize everybody's got a different mindset about how to go forward, and you can see down the path to some of the things that you've talked about where people will start their ideologies will start to conflict and the pathology will set in. And so just some examples of what leadership development looks like when you're like walking up to this group of eager, diverse, completely on different page people.
Yeah, I would just say first, Gail, I think your group needs to have a training. That's number one.
Mm-hmm.
Because one, they need common language.
Yes.
Need a common analysis.
Mm-hmm.
They need to understand why they're so divided with different ideologies and philosophy. And they feel strong in their own position. But and I would ask you to see if your team understand what racism is.
Mm-hmm.
And you can start off at one day, say, I got a team of people who want to do something. So I guess before we get started, how do you understand racism?
Mm-hmm.
And it could be all people of color. That's going to let you know right now they need some more understanding because they don't have common language. They don't have a common definition.
Mm-hmm.
They don't have a common analysis. And it's not enough for you to have it.
Right.
Yourself,
right.
Because so people are all over the place. So
Mm-hmm.
so pathology is playing out because they don't understand where the pathology is coming from. So you got to get them on the same page. And I don't care what training group you do, make sure that and you can't get a group that's going to find racism is just getting along with white people. Because some people want
Mm-hmm.
you got to define it where it has to do with power.
Mm-hmm.
You know, because there are a lot of people doing work out here talking about equity work. You don't know what the hell equity really means because they can't even define equity. Because
Right.
equity now is the buzzword to get money as well. So I
Mm-hmm.
would just say that you need to get a nucleus of people, not all of them, but get you 5 or 6 people and get them to get to a training where they have some common understanding. And then you can talk about an agenda. So you can't talk about doing something with your group you really have a group.
Right.
You got a bunch of ideologies and a bunch of whatever, you know. So a common language is number one. That don't mean you're still not gonna have some challenges,
Yeah.
but that's a beginning. That's a beginning.
Thank you.
Thanks, Gail. Other questions?
I have a question. Um, there was a point when you were talking about a human indicator to measure effectiveness. And I think that's what you said, if I'm correct. I just wanted, maybe, could you like explain a little bit what you mean? Because I think I guess I don't really know what my question is, but I'm just curious more about that because I think I don't quite understand. So I would love to understand.
If I think I'm hearing what you're saying is that what are some indicators to know you're being effective? What are
Yeah,
some,
I think you said a human indicator. Were you saying, I guess, yeah, I'm unclear exactly what you mean by that.
well, for me is that a lot of times when we're doing this work, sometimes we tell people they're doing good work is when they get funding or somebody communicate, you know, you thank you for all the work you've done, or you get a certificate or whatever it is. But when you're really serious about this work, if you're working with a group of human beings, you need some human indicators to let you know. That's the best indicator to know you're on the right path. All this other stuff about getting grant money, somebody patting you on the back, giving you a certificate, and all that. I'm not minimizing that. But the people that you serve and that you're giving services to, or your staff that's giving services to, again, when you see their minds open up, when you see that the people you serve start asking you questions, start challenging you, start asking where you getting your grant money from, stuff like that they don't normally do. They're so busy asking you for some help. So that becomes a human indicator for you personally and your team to know you're on the right track. Because most of us do this work, never know if we're on the right track. We think we're on the right track. We talking to ourselves or whatever, you know, because we don't even collaborate with the staff. We don't collaborate with our department. So that's what I don't know if that
No,
expands.
that makes a lot of sense, and it's something that I've thought about a lot in my organization around how do you know you're doing anything that's actually helpful for anyone. You might be patting yourself on the back for something that no one even wanted in the first place, and how do we garner feedback from the people that we are saying that we're serving or collaborating with or working with, and how do we get feedback that it's actually going well or going in a way that's helpful to them. So it's something I've been thinking about, but I wanted to make sure I understood what you were saying, so I really appreciate that. Thank you.
I appreciate the question. See, and the other question is that, see, as a staff person, whether you're black, white, brown, whatever, you can come into work on these kind of jobs, but you need those human indicators to keep you grounded.
Mm-hmm.
Because whether you understand it or not, when we work in these institutions, whether you're working at now, you go into a slow process of co-optation. You're being co-opted very, very slowly. And you might, not me, I'm strong, black, brown. That's what the down the way culture does. And we don't know what is happening because we don't connect even among staff. They got us compartmentalized where we don't get together often. So your constituency, now the problem with that is that the constituency is a universal problem where everybody we use the language engagement, but we really can't do it. So when you work hard to get 5, I don't care if it's 5 people in a year's time, that you took them to a process of leadership and you played a big role in it, that same people are going to keep you from being co-opted. Because Black and brown people are being co-opted in these institutions every day, and they don't understand it. And we think we're strong. I'm talking about our experience. I ain't talking about no hypothetical. We think because we come from live experiences, we much clearer. You can have a live experience, but they'll give you another experience that you ain't ready for. Because what happens is Black and brown people, we start operating these institutions as individuals. But in the communities of color, we've been a collective all of our life. And then so we model off a white model. And for us, whether it's white or brown, you need a constituency. For white people, gotta develop more white people. I don't care if it's 2 or 3 in a year's time, revolutionary work to get them open. But white people, they get their people of color because they think that's the way they're supposed to go at. But not that you shouldn't do that, but you got to work with some white people because that's going to give you your best indicator as a white person or whatever your ethnicity may be. Because the community of color would not give white people the best indicator. If we're not real with our own self, we'll play you, we'll game you, that kind of thing. So that's why you gotta get that human kid. All that other stuff ain't gonna work. I believe. And
I'm Lucy. I'm so glad you asked that question because we are constantly in a situation of trying to figure out how we know that we did anything. Like, right? I mean, we could, those of us who are in human services know that we can spend up all the money and we can be absolutely exhausted and still not know if we did anything, right? We still don't know if people are better off long-term than they were when they first came across us. And so one of the things that we've been thinking about a lot, and I've been sort of struggling with, is this idea of how do we know that leadership has been developed? How do you know, especially since that is not often the focus of our work, right? The focus of our work is to provide somebody this service, which I think somewhere in our discipline, we've got to change how we think about this because that is not the end goal, right? But that is how we're taught. And so how do we ever get to the point we know that leadership is being developed? Because I'll tell you that we don't learn that in our research methods classes. We don't learn that in our statistics classes, right? We really don't learn how do we measure leadership development as part of the services that we provided. And we're not taught to do that. So that is really a new muscle that we have to develop.
And when let me say, a lot of social workers, when they go get their practicum, they go in the community to get it. They go get real experiences. And they work with a lot of nonprofits. And most of the nonprofits, if you look at their mission, most of the nonprofits in their mission, they got the word empowerment in it. But yet they're teaching social workers about social work, but in their mission, they got empowerment. Most of the nonprofits have never done a power analysis. They operate out of a needs analysis. So just the language they're using. So we go get a practicum from community groups who are confused as hell as well. Because they've been working in a Black or brown community for a long time, so everybody go get their experience there. Do social workers get practical experience working in white communities? I'm sure do y'all get a lot of, do y'all take?
Depends on where you're located, but it really, really does depend on where. But in Baltimore, most of the work we do is with people of color, Black people, and a growing brown population. Yeah.
See, there's something it's not bad. It's not a bad thing, but there's something missing in a lot of ways. Because I've done enough work with community groups. Now, what has helped me in the group that I work with, I meet people in the street quite often in different cities, and they walk up to me and say, "Brother Chisom, I just went to the Undoing Racism workshop. You ought to go check it out. You might get something from it." So when I hear that, I know it ain't dependent on me.
That's right.
It ain't dependent on me. And I don't tell them no different. That means what we've been teaching, the ideology and philosophy is all over, is around the world. And I didn't really understand that. And I'm glad to see that happening, that the word is out there, whether we have an office or not, our word is still out there. When the word that you all been teaching, all of you all on the Zoom, when people start telling you things in that kind of a manner, you know that what you've been teaching them is they're hearing you. Because we can talk to people, if their minds are not open, they're not going to hear you because they're trying to game too. So that's what helps me to know when I transition, well, it's going to be out there. I can't even control it. I mean, it's out there, and I'm excited about that and encouraging. And I call that an interdependency model, but I went from being dependent, then independent,
Yeah.
and interdependent, So,
Love that.
yeah. And Meg,
Hi. Yes, nice to see you again, Brother Ron.
Yeah.
So going back to the continuum of dependence to independence to interdependence, which I think is a very powerful visual in my mind, I'm struggling with the same question that Wendy raised about how do we know we've had impact. So in your experience, can you share situations where you have been able to realize or recognize when someone has moved from dependence to independence? What kinds of things does that look like, and how can we identify that progress in that area?
well, maybe when it happened to me, I didn't really know till somebody from the community walked up to me, which they didn't know me at the time. It's another city, and had been to the workshop and said that they learned so much from the undoing racism training, and when they indicated me that I ought to go check it out. But I think a good organizer. Do you see yourself as an organizer, Meg?
I'm beginning to.
Okay, but are you a social worker, a teacher?
Yes. No,
Okay.
I'm a social worker. I'm a graduate of the program.
Okay, good. So to me, all social workers are organizers. Giving services is a part of part of an organizer's job. A organizer is someone that give services, mobilize people, develop leadership. So most people look at organizing as a mystique, as something different, and it's something I don't do. But once you understand what a job description is for an organizer, which you are, you're a social worker, you have one job description, but you're more than that. You're a motivator, you're an educator, you give technical help. You do all those things as a social worker. You're a motivator, you're an educator, and you give technical assistance. Would you say you do that at some level?
Yes.
Okay. The other piece that is not always talked about as an organizer, you help people to develop. You help to develop leadership. Now, that's not talked about. The other ones are talked about, motivate, educate. I'm in all those categories. But you help somebody get a sense of their power. You don't empower them because they already got power. The people that you serve in social work, they already have power. But when you look at them, because of years of oppression, they look powerless. So most people don't understand, you don't empower people, you help them get a sense of their power. And that's a process, that's a step. You got to take them to a step, but you got to work with people long enough to be able to see that. It's a beautiful experience. That's what we call the internal dynamics of leadership development. That becomes the human indicator that we're talking about. But you got to see yourself. And most time, the system don't want to let us look at us, because years ago, organizing is everything we've gotten to be where we're at right now. Even some of the Black and brown people in social work school, they never was invited to go to no social work school. They came out through organizing, through hell raising. That's how they got there. But some people in social work people of color get confused. I haven't got a degree, I got it. No, you got it because somebody opened the door. You have a damn degree and they still wouldn't let you in these doors. So,
You know, Brother Rob, you make me think of the example you give of Mrs. Smith, whatever, the first time you take her down to City Hall
yeah,
with a group and she sits in the back and she's all the way far back. She couldn't get any further back. And then the next time you bring her she moves up a little bit and, she's moving towards the front of the room. And the
Yeah.
next time you bring her, she goes up to the lawmakers and let me tell you one MF thing. And,
Yeah.
you watch her progression of leadership and her sense of power. I love to hear you talk about that because it's helpful.
The big problem was that I was so busy into myself as an individual. And once you go to social work in these areas that you're all in, you're being set up to be individuals doing this work. You're part of a family. But the way you got you all structured in all these damn programs and you got your compartmentalized, you can be a black or brown person, but you're operating how white people have been set up to be individuals, not a collective. So part of that stuff is that you got to get some of the all these things are playing out amongst you as staff, the superiority. You got people of color doing good work, but you deal with some of the internal inferiority stuff amongst yourself. Then you bring some brothers from Africa and some sisters. There's another dynamics going on amongst each other. You bring folks from the Latino or the Asian. There's some dynamics on how they feel about black people. That shit is real. And so so I'm saying, you gotta see your work as helping yourselves clean yourselves out, and then you can recognize better what you need to see. But the pathologist got your lens because of racism. Your lens are not clear, whether you got a degree or not. You can be certified and be confused, So that don't mean because you got a degree. And the more degrees you get, the more you get caught up in not being clear about what you're doing. So Meg, I don't know. I'm saying a lot, but it's a very important question. I see you as an organizer. And once you can see yourself with a job description, it's going to help you to do what you've been doing or what you want to continue to do. But not understand now whether that doesn't mean you have to go get a job, but that's really what you're a motivator, an educator. You work, you help people that you serve open up their minds. You can give somebody a service, but develop a little strategy. When you give them that service, tell Ms. Jones, say, Ms. Jones, you know why you're in this situation? Or you can recommend Ms. Jones, come to our, there's a trainer I want you to come to. Because we do this training for people in the community. And it's amazed how this, you say, Brother Chisom, you done put my life on that board. No, you put your own life on that board. So all this, and they're going to be able to appreciate you when you can take the people you're serving, help them get another level of learning. And it just will make a difference, and see yourselves in partnership with them.
So I'm really struggling with the word empower now. I used to really like that word. And as I sit here today and I just Googled it, on my phone, and there's two different definitions. And I think one works for us and one doesn't. And it's really kind of messing with my head. The first is to give someone authority or power. And that goes right back to the power dynamic. And that's not what we want to be doing. That's not, it's not our power to give them. We're working from a different perspective. But then right after that, it says to make someone stronger or more confident, especially in controlling their life. So I can relate to that definition, but it's not about power. It's more about confidence. And I don't know, maybe you could reduce it to something as simple as skill building, but I'm just wondering if empowerment is even where we need to be right now.
Nothing wrong with that word, Meg. Power is scrumptious. Power is good, but people have used power in a very bad way. And we've been tended by that. Ain't nothing wrong with power. Nothing wrong with power. If you do it in a very respectful way. And the community does have power. There's nothing wrong with helping them get a sense of their power.
Right.
Because they need power to fight the injustice of power over the years. So give them power. But because we've learned coming up in these scrupulous systems that power ain't no good because people have misused power, abused power. But power is scrumptious. We got to make sure our community is powerful. But see, we've got to change because we are worried about the word power because it's been so abused. That doesn't mean you can't use it in a very beautiful way. And when you don't use it in a beautiful way, you're stopping other people from getting it because of the way you've been taught about this thing about power. Power is not bad. It's a beautiful thing. And that's what's stopping us from doing our work, power. Nothing wrong with power. And now when we define racism, race prejudice plus power, we said we say white people are racist, and they get emotional. All we're saying is that they got privilege that they didn't earn. And we saying we define power as anybody who got legitimate access to systems, institution, sanctioned by by the state. All people got legitimate is white people. Now, in the Black community, we got power, but they ain't recognized. We got power. Everything we've gotten has been through powerful sources. But you need a definition of it. It's not a bad thing, man, but we've been taught. That's why the Ireland's got to get clear about it as a negative thing. But power is a beautiful thing. It is all not bad. Every nonprofit I work with, everyone that y'all work in social work, if you check it, they all got, they're using it, and every nonprofit using it to empower the community. The reason why they got it difficult because they have not done a power analysis. They've done a needs analysis, or they see the community as a victim analysis, or a do-good analysis, or something called a white man's burden analysis, which means we got to take care of them poor Black folks because they really can't take care of themselves. That's what's being said. So I would encourage you. That's why you in partnership with them. The community is gonna get us much clearer about it. But when we keep doing it for them and not with them, we're not going to get educated about what we need to do.
Thank you, Brother Ron. I would love to hear Ty's question as our closing sort of exercise.
Go ahead.
Brother Ron, how you doing, man?
Good to see you again.
Always. You actually answered my question just in hearing you talk. I wanted to hear a little bit more. You spoke about how an indicator of success for a facilitator is getting folks to show up, right? What does that initial recruitment look like for neighbors to be able to attend? I was wanting to have you just talk a little bit about what does the retention part look like for you? What have been your strategies? Wendy lifted up the conversation around Miss Smith and how she kept coming back while her sense of ownership continued to grow and caused her to move closer to the front. I get that part, right? But when it comes to community organizing, when folks are coming together for a greater cause, I'm really interested in what have been your successful strategies for retention to keep folks coming back?
It's good question. When we talk about the Miss Smith, I talk about the thing in New Orleans, this Irish Channel Consortium, or this health clinic. For years, these were residents that were living in public housing, all Black folks. And Black women were the leaders, and Black men were being misused by the police. When we formed that group, in my mind, I was busy trying to help people with their housing. That's where my mind was. See, I had to grow along the way. It wasn't even about leadership development at the time. That kind of came. I was trying to save people from having a decent place to live where their rents wasn't going to go up high. But then when we formed this thing called a consortium, I began to learn and grow. Sometimes teachers got to know when to listen and when to learn. But some of us who teach don't never stop teaching, and we don't learn. So at that time I started learning, especially when they gave me a report card, put an F on it, because the same thing I was teaching them, I was not practicing. So after this consortium formed, after about 7 or 8 years, community people and agencies together on this consortium, we wound up losing the projects. Got torn down when Katrina came, it got knocked out. Now I was into saving the housing. I would think about saving the people. But in my mind, that was automatically, but that wasn't automatic. So what came out of that was that once we lost the part, I was sad, man, because we lost people housing. What came out of that was leadership development. Several years of people developing. We formed a group of Black men called Black Men United for Change. This is where the police came with busting Black men in the head, killing them when they want. Once we formed this consortium, the police had to come talk to us before they could do what they were doing, just run over people. All these folks, I say the majority of folks that was a part of this consortium are somewhere in New Orleans or somewhere in the country are leaders. And it wasn't so much saving a house, and it was developing leadership process. It was a beautiful experience. Some of them are running grants. Brother named Cool Black, who started the Black Men United. He's right now one of our trainers, been with me for almost 20 some years. Strong young brother. So I would just say they're all over the country are doing very important things. That's the retention. They're still doing the work. They're now doing preventative work. They're helping. See, all of our trainers, we have 100 trainers, and everyone got to be involved in the community. They ain't no facilitator. We do facilitate because we have to, but they got to be involved in the community. If not, they can't be part of our team. So we don't just talk that shit about being a good trainer, or you got to come to a workshop. If they're not doing work in the community, then they can't be a part of our team. So we got people right now that are leaders and are maintaining and are retaining. But that is the question. But sometimes it happens. You just got to get them with. The same thing I was mentioning to Gail. The people that you're working with, they got to have a same language because they're all over the place. And rightfully so, because they've been beaten down, they've been dealt with, they've been, they got pathology. They're one step from being, but it's the same thing with you all at staff. As far as people of color, we were one step from being broke again. That kind of thing right there. When you leave these damn jobs at the social work school, the police still can pop you in your damn head or shoot you in your knee. So it's always something going on all the time. That's why we need each other. So I don't know if I answered that, but that's been my example of it.
No, that's helpful. I appreciate it. Thank you much.
I appreciate it because retention is, we talk about when we're in jail, that's a big issue. But people, retention and people going back over and over again. A lot of brothers we working with in Seattle, they're now, we got them involved in the community. Some even gotten out of jail early who was having 20 and 30 years. There's 4 prisons we're working with up in Washington State, 4 of them. I try to do this in New Orleans and Angola, but the warden wouldn't let us get it. He wouldn't let us get up in there. But I'm working with some brothers who did 40 years in jail and they all got out, called it Angola 3. Okay. And they did 40 years. 2 of them died. I'm going to visit with one right now. I meet with him every week. We sit and hang out together. His name is King Wilkerson. If you do the research, it's called an Angola 3. They try to start the Black Panther Party inside the jail, and they refused, and they gave more time. And one brother did 40 years. The brother I'm going to see now did 29 years in solitary. Wow. And he keeps his mind solid, And when you get a chance come out, make sure we get a chance to meet him. Oh, yeah. So I know the time is on us, but I appreciate y'all listening and the work that y'all are doing. I really think what's going on in this country, school of social work, and if you're not in social, whatever you're doing, the organizing is going to be the thing that can counteract, because it's not all dim. We can't let this presidential dynamics get us so dim. We got local elected officials we got to deal with, and we got community we got to deal with. But we got to continue doing the work that was got us where we at. You didn't get it because social work, because you just qualified. You need to be qualified, but because your family stood up and fought and died, open these doors for y'all to be there right now. So thank y'all for letting me talk. It feel good for an old person to get their mind stimulated, and to thank y'all so much for, for me learning, and watching your body language in the room. So keep.
Thank you, Brother Ron. You have so much knowledge. We could have another hour-long discussion just on so many things you talked about that we didn't get to really dig into because there was just so much. But this recording will be available on YouTube at some point. We will send it out. Thank you, Brother Ron. We are working hard on getting this book finished. All of the principles we've talked about, Brother Ron has talked about in the book. I think the book is a great companion to the Undoing Racism workshop, and I think it will help sort of answer some questions and give you more to think about. So we're trying to get that done. Brother Ron's birthday is on Friday. He turns 83, so we can wish him happy birthday.
Thank you so much. Thank y'all so much, and we're going to make sure that they're part of this book too, because they're helping with the book.
That's right. You all are